In early 1961, a self-serve station off Route 1 kept a Coke cooler by the door. One bottle's smeared label would later dismantle a pipeline, but tonight it cost the attendant $2. In the case notes, a glue-smeared Coke label would later unravel an exchange that ruined an ordinary man's job. Ray Jenkins worked the late shift with his sleeves rolled and his pay counted down to the penny. The cooler door stuck unless you yanked it, and the bottles clinked like change when they settled. Near closing, his manager held up a Coke like it was evidence. The label was crooked, the glue half set, the red paper puckered at one edge. Customers won't buy this, the manager said, and marked it as spoiled. Spoiled meant missing on the daily count. Missing meant Ray's drawer didn't balance. He didn't argue. He couldn't. 2 days later, another smeared label showed up. Then another. Always in the front row, always cold, always looking like it had been handled twice. Ray started scraping the dried glue with his thumbnail, as if he could peel the problem off. It came away in little clear curls. Nothing else looked wrong. He tried a simple fix. He stocked the cooler himself and faced every label out, neat as a postcard rack. By the following week, the same thing happened anyway. A man in a work jacket would drift in between supper and dark, nod once, and head straight for the cooler. Coins dropped. A bottle hit the tray thunk, and the man walked out with it without opening it. Ray watched the register. No sale. Just a wet ring left on the counter when the bottle moved. This is still just a gas station, and Ray is still one write-up from being replaced. So he did what people do when they're running out of room. He stayed quiet and started paying attention. Most evenings, the man arrived inside the same 10-minute window. He never hesitated. He picked the bottle with the smeared label like he already knew where it would be. On a Tuesday, when the highway was empty, Ray stepped closer and saw something else. A clean bottle sat beside the smeared one, but the caps didn't match. One was slightly higher, as if the liner beneath it was thicker. Ray kept his hands in his pockets and stared at the higher cap. Who was coming back for it? The next morning, Ray showed up before the coffee finished brewing in the back room. Same station, same stuck cooler door, same highway noise that never fully stopped. He lifted the metal lid on the outside storage bin and checked yesterday's empties. Glass clinked against glass. A few bottles still wore that smeared edge of glue, like someone had worried at the label with a damp thumb. He scraped one with his nail again. Habit, now, clear curls, nothing underneath. On paper, though, something was underneath. Ray kept the day's stock sheet under the register, folded twice so it wouldn't look important. Columns for deliveries, columns for returns, a box for spoilage, which was the polite word for blame. When the manager came in, he didn't look at the bottles first. He looked at the numbers. He tapped the sheet with a pen and slid it back across the counter. Not angry. Worse. Certain. Ray understood the message without needing the lecture. If the counts didn't match, the station didn't eat the loss. The shift did. That's how the place stayed clean and cheap and open late. It wasn't a mystery, it was policy, dressed up as math. At this point, it's still just a gas station, a cooler, and a man trying not to get replaced. 2 days later, a delivery truck pulled up with a soft hiss of air brakes. The driver moved fast, clipboard first, then crates, wood slats on concrete, sweat darkening his cap. Ray watched from the doorway because watching was free. The driver didn't bother with small talk. He handed Ray the invoice and kept moving, stacking cases like he'd done it 1,000 times, which he had. Ray signed where he always signed. A quick slash of ink. No middle initial, no flourish. He was careful not to smear it. He flipped the top page and scanned the line items anyway. Cases delivered, cases credited. Deposit totals. His eyes snagged on one number that didn't belong. One case listed as returned, but Ray hadn't returned it. Not to the truck, not to anyone. He looked down at the empties bin. Then up at the stacked cases. Nothing about the station looked short. That was the problem. He took the invoice to the manager, who was counting cigarette cartons. The manager barely glanced at it. He just set it on the counter like it was nothing, and kept counting. Ray waited for the correction that didn't come. The manager finally lifted his eyes and gave Ray a look that wasn't a threat, exactly. More like a warning disguised as advice. Ray could push. Make it official. Demand a call to the distributor. Or he could do what most people do when their job sits on a thin edge: swallow it and keep moving. He chose the second option. The day rolled on in the familiar way. A few gallons pumped, a few oil checks, a few tired men buying candy bars they didn't want, and then, right on schedule, between supper and dark, the work jacket man came in again. Same nod, same straight line to the cooler, no hesitation. Coins clinked, a bottle dropped thunk into the tray. He didn't open it, he didn't drink it, he didn't even wipe the condensation off his palm. He walked it to the counter, set it down for a moment, and asked for a pack of gum. Ray rang up the gum. The bottle stayed on the counter just long enough to leave a wet circle. Then it was gone with the man. Ray stared at the circle as it widened and faded. It was a small thing, a nothing thing. But small things were taking money from his pocket now. By the following week, the manager started adjusting the drawer at the end of Ray's shift. Always the same tone, always calm. A couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. Ray didn't have extra dollars. He had rent that came like a clock. He had a car that needed a new belt. He had groceries that cost more than they used to. So he tightened his routine the only way he could. He began stocking the cooler himself. And he began placing bottles like markers, front row, back row, labels faced out, caps level. He learned which bottles came from which case by tiny imperfections in the glass. A bubble in the neck, a faint scuff on the heel. He didn't tell anyone he was doing it. Not the manager, not the delivery driver. Silence was the cheapest tool he had. At this point, it's still just Ray. A cooler door that sticks, an account that keeps coming up wrong. After closing, when the last car's headlights washed across the lot and disappeared, Ray pulled the stock sheet back out. He wrote the day's numbers carefully. He copied the invoice totals twice. Then he compared them to the previous week. The returned case wasn't a one-time error. It was a repeating mark, showing up every few days like it belonged there. And on the days it showed up, the smeared label bottle showed up too. Ray stared at the paper until the fluorescent lights hummed louder than the room. He turned the invoice over and saw a second signature on a carbon copy, faint, half-printed, like it had been pressed hard somewhere else first. It wasn't the driver's handwriting. It wasn't Ray's. Ray stopped calling it bad stock. He started calling it a pattern. He bought a cheap pocket notebook from the rack by the register, the kind tourists used for postcards, and wrote 3 things at the top of the first page: time, bottle, who. Then he waited. Between supper and dark, the station always had the same lull. The after-work rush thinned out. The highway stayed loud, but the lot went quiet enough that the bell on the door sounded like a gunshot. The work jacket man arrived right in that gap again, 8 minutes after 6, same as the last time. He didn't glance at the oil cans, the candy, the cigarette counter. He walked like the floor had lines painted on it. Straight to the cooler, Ray stayed behind the register and didn't move. He watched with the kind of stillness you learn when you're trying not to spook a stray dog. Coins clinked. A bottle dropped thunk into the tray. The man didn't lift it and turn it like a thirsty person would. He didn't wipe the glass. He didn't check the date on the cap. Instead, he slid the bottle in the tray just far enough that the label faced him. Then his thumb found the smeared edge. Just a touch. A small, practiced press where the glue hadn't set right. He didn't smile. He didn't pause, but his fingers tightened, like he just confirmed something. He took the bottle and walked out. Ray wrote the time. He wrote smear in the bottle column. He wrote the man's description the way a person writes when they don't want to admit they're doing it. Work jacket, boots, short hair, moves like routine. The next day, the manager called him into the back room and closed the door. No raised voice, no shouting. That wasn't this man's style. He was the kind of boss who punished you with calm. He showed Ray the weekly sheet. The returned case line item showed up again. Then he flipped to payroll. A note in the margin. A deduction. $2.40. It wasn't a fortune. That was the point. It was small enough to be humiliating, not big enough to fight. Ray felt heat rise in his neck anyway. I didn't take anything, he said. The manager's eyes didn't change. Then make it stop. That night, Ray didn't stock the cooler the usual way. He staged it. Front row, 6 bottles with clean labels, caps level. Second row, 1 bottle with a smeared label left side, Third position placed like a bead on a string. And then he did something he'd never done before. He stepped away from the register. He left the counter unattended and walked into the narrow back aisle where the mop bucket lived, where the manager couldn't see him from the office window, where the station's hum swallowed small sounds. From there, he had a clear angle through the glass. He could see the cooler. He could see the door. He could see the vending tray. He could see what people did when they thought no one was watching. At 6:08, the work jacket man came in. Same nod to no one. Same beeline. Ray held his breath and listened to the world narrow down to one noise. Coins clinked. Bottle dropped thunk. The man crouched, but not to grab just any bottle. He looked at the row like he was checking a seating chart. His fingers moved past 2 clean labels without touching them. Then he stopped at the smeared one. He didn't pull it immediately. He tested the cap, not twisting, just pressing down with his thumb, feeling for height, for resistance, for that tiny difference Ray had noticed before. Cap slightly higher, a thicker liner underneath, a bottle that didn't feel like the others. He took it. And then this was the part that made Ray's stomach tighten. He didn't leave right away. He walked to the counter and set the bottle down beside the gum display, exactly where he'd done it before. He asked for gum again. Same brand. Same tone. Ray stayed in the back aisle, watching the counter like it was a stage. The man paid for the gum. He did not pay for the Coke. Ray saw it clearly now, with no room for excuses. The Coke wasn't merchandise to him. It was something else, a handled object, a piece in motion. The man picked up the bottle and walked out. Ray moved fast but quiet. He stepped to the register and checked the receipt tape. Gum sale only. He opened the drawer and counted the bills. He counted the coins. He matched it to the meter in his head. No shortage, not tonight. Which meant the missing money wasn't coming from the man's pocket. It was coming from the paper, from invoices, from returns that didn't happen, from a system that could drain you without anyone ever taking a dollar from your hand. Ray wrote in his notebook, gum only, no Coke sale. And then, because he couldn't help himself, he wrote one more line under it. Why leave wet ring? Because the counter circle mattered. He didn't know how yet, but it was the one thing the man repeated like a ritual set: bottle down, buy gum, pick bottle up, go. A signal, maybe? Or a timing cue. Ray locked up after closing and stood alone by the cooler door. He yanked it open, bottles clinked. He pulled out one clean label Coke and one smeared label Coke and held them side by side under the fluorescent light. Same shape, same glass, same condensation. He pressed both caps with his thumb. One gave slightly. The other felt sealed tighter, taller by a hair like it was hiding a second skin. Ray set them back and stared at the row. If he was being robbed, it wasn't by customers. If he was being framed, it wasn't by accident. And if that bottle wasn't meant to be drunk, then the real question wasn't why it kept disappearing. It was where it was going. Ray didn't go to the police. In his head, the police were for wrecks on the highway and stolen radios, not for crooked invoices and Coke bottles with bad glue. Instead, he did the thing that felt safer. He called the distributor. He waited until the station was quiet, then dialed the number printed on the delivery invoice. A woman answered, bored and bright at the same time, and Ray heard paper shuffling like she was already thinking about getting off the phone. He didn't say spy. He didn't say theft. He said, "My returns don't match my deliveries." There was a pause. Then she asked for the invoice number. Slow and careful, like she'd been trained to do it that way. Ray read it out, and when he finished, the woman's voice changed. Not panic, just attention. "Hold on," she said. Ray listened to the line breathe. In the background, a second voice murmured, too far to catch words. Then a click, and the woman came back with a new question. "Do you have any bottles with labels that look wrong?" she asked. Ray's throat went dry. He glanced at the cooler like it could hear him. "Yes," he said. "A few." Another pause. Longer this time. "Don't throw them out," she said. "Keep them. And sir, don't talk about this with customers." Ray hung up and stared at the receiver for a full 10 seconds before he set it down. That afternoon, a sedan Ray didn't recognize parked across the lot, engine off. 2 men stayed inside, not reading, not smoking, not moving like people who were waiting for gas. They were waiting for time. Ray tried to ignore them. He tried to do his job, but his eyes kept drifting to the windshield glass, to the angle of their heads, to the way one of them lifted something small and black like a camera, then lowered it again. At 6:08, the bell over the door rang. Work jacket man. Same boots, same pace, same empty nod. He went to the cooler. Coins clinked, bottle dropped, thunk. Ray watched his hands through the glass. The man slid bottles aside without taking any. Not random, not thirsty. Searching. Then his fingers found the smeared label. One touch along that gummy edge confirmation, and he took it. Outside, the sedan door opened. One of the men got out and walked to his own car like he was just stretching his legs. He didn't follow close. He didn't look like a tail. He looked like a man who had errands. But when the work jacket man turned onto the service road, the sedan eased out behind him, smooth as oil. Ray's heartbeat didn't slow until the taillights disappeared. That night after closing, Ray did something he hadn't allowed himself to do before. He pulled the smeared label bottle from the cooler, held it under the harsh light, and looked at it like it was a puzzle with teeth. The paper label wasn't just crooked. It was reset. Glue was smeared at the edge, like it had been peeled back and pressed down again, never quite landing in the same place. Ray ran his thumbnail under it. The label lifted a hair just enough to catch, not enough to rip. And for the first time, he understood what this smear really was. Not a mistake. A mark. A crude, repeatable way to say, this one. The next day, the distributor's regional rep arrived. He wore a clean shirt, too clean for moving crates, and he shook Ray's hand like he was already apologizing. Behind him came one of the sedan men. No badge flashed. No big introduction. Just a plain, quiet sentence. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Ray's mouth felt full of cotton. Who are you? The man looked at the cooler, not at Ray. Federal. That was all he said. They stood in the back aisle by the mop bucket, speaking low, like the station itself could be listening. Ray told them the pattern, the time window, the gum, the wet ring, the missing returns on paper, the cap that sat slightly higher. The federal man asked questions that didn't sound like questions. How long has the same person been selecting the same bottle? How many times a week? Does anyone else ever take the smeared label bottles? Do you ever see empties come back? Ray admitted something he'd been trying not to admit. He hadn't watched the empties close enough. He'd been too busy not losing his job. The federal man nodded once, not judging him, just filing it away. Then he said, "We going to watch from here." End quote. That evening, they turned Ray's little station into a place with shadows. A second sedan parked farther down the frontage road. A man sat in it with a camera braced against the steering wheel. Another stood near the phone booth, pretending to read a newspaper that he never turned. Ray was told to do one thing: act normal. Normal meant stocking the cooler the same way. Normal meant ringing gum and cigarettes and pretending he didn't feel like the floor had changed under him. At 6:08, the work jacket man came again. Same entrance, same path, same practiced hands. Coins clinked. Bottle dropped, thunk. Ray saw him test the cap with his thumb. Then the man set the bottle down on the counter for the gum purchase wet ring forming. Faint and perfect. He paid for gum. He picked up the bottle. And as he turned toward the door, something changed. For the first time, he hesitated. Not because Ray moved. Ray didn't. Because the bottle in his hand wasn't the one he expected. Ray had stocked the cooler as usual, but under the federal man's instructions, he'd moved one smeared label bottle back a single slot, a shift so small it looked like nothing. The work jacket man stopped, just for a beat, and looked down at the label like he was reading a sentence. His jaw tightened. Then he did something no thirsty customer would do. He turned the bottle slightly in his hand, checking the smear's exact shape, as if the pattern of the glue mattered more than the Coke inside. Ray felt it, then cold certainty, sliding into place. The smear wasn't just this bottle. It was also this time, this place, this exact mark. A timing system, a language. The man put the bottle down again harder than usual, making the wet ring wider. Then he walked out without buying another thing. Outside, a sedan engine turned over, and Ray watched through the glass as the work jacket man didn't drive away. He stood by his car, waiting, eyes on the station door like he was expecting someone else to notice what had gone wrong. Ray didn't go to the local police. Not yet. In his world, the police handled wrecks on the highway and teenagers lifting hubcaps, not delivery invoices that kept correcting themselves. So he called the distributor number printed at the bottom of the Coke invoice. A woman answered with a voice that sounded like she'd said the same greeting all day. Paper shifted in the background. Ray kept it small. My returns don't match my deliveries. A pause. Then her tone changed, not alarm, just attention. Read me the invoice number. He did. She asked a second question, slower. Do you have bottles with labels that look off? Ray looked at the cooler like it could overhear him. Yes. Don't throw them out, she said. Keep them. And don't discuss it in front of customers. That was the first time anyone said customers like they were a risk. Ray hung up and stood behind the register, hands flat on the counter, listening to the station hum. The same gum rack, the same cigarette cartons, the same cash drawer that kept being short on paper. At this point, it was still just a gas station, and Ray was still the one being blamed. That afternoon, a sedan he didn't recognize parked across the lot with the engine off. Two men stayed inside, not reading, not smoking, not moving, like people killing time. They were waiting for a window. Ray tried not to stare. He checked oil. He wiped the counter. He restocked the gum. Every so often, he glanced through the glass. One of the men lifted a small black camera to his face, held it steady, then lowered it. Not for scenery, for timing. At 6:08, the bell above the door rang. The work jacket man came in with the same routine pace like he'd measured the floor in earlier visits. He went straight to the cooler. Coins clinked. A bottle dropped thunk into the tray. He didn't pick up the first bottle his fingers touched. He slid two aside without taking them, then stopped at one with a smeared label edge glue, puckered, paper slightly lifted. He pressed the cap with his thumb, not twisting, pressing. Then he took it and walked toward the counter. Ray watched the counter like it was a test. The man set the bottle down beside the gum rack, asked for gum, paid for gum, and picked the bottle up again. No Coke sale on the tape. Outside, the sedan door opened. One of the waiting men stepped out and walked to his own car like he was just stretching his legs. He didn't follow close. He didn't even look like he cared. But when the work jacket man turned onto the service road, the sedan eased out behind him, smooth and patient. Ray kept ringing customers until the taillights were gone. After closing, he locked the door, flipped the sign, and stood alone with the cooler. He yanked it open. Bottles clinked against glass dividers. Cold air rolled out, smelling faintly of metal and syrup. He pulled a smeared label bottle and a clean one and held them under the ceiling light. Same glass, same shape, same red label, except the smear wasn't random. It sat in a repeatable place, like a thumb had pushed glue outward in a crescent. Ray ran his thumbnail under the loosened edge. The label lifted a fraction, then stuck again. He didn't peel it all the way. He didn't want to destroy the only thing he had that felt real. Instead, he set the bottle on the counter and used the station's dull razor blade, the one he used to open cardboard boxes, to barely tease the label edge up, just enough to see what was underneath. Nothing dramatic. No microfilm. No hidden note. But the paper beneath looked bruised, wrinkled once, then pressed back flat, like someone had lifted the label, done something small, and put it back down in a hurry. The next morning, his manager was already waiting in the office. He didn't slam anything. He didn't raise his voice. He just pointed to the payroll sheet. Another deduction. Ray stared at the number. Small again. The kind of loss that didn't justify a lawyer, but still took groceries off a table. The manager tapped the paper once. Figure it out. Ray nodded and walked back out front with the same face he always wore at work. Then he checked his wallet in the restroom stall, out of habit, like the money might have come back. It hadn't. That afternoon, a clean-shirted man arrived from the distributor. He wasn't dressed to carry crates. He carried a clipboard and a small cardboard box. Behind him came one of the sedan men. No badge flashed, no formal introduction. The man just looked at the cooler and said, "We want to ask a few questions." Ray's voice came out thin. "Who are you?" "Federal," the man said. Nothing more. They spoke in the back aisle by the mop bucket, out of customer earshot. Ray gave them what he had. The time window, the gum purchase, the wet ring on the counter, The returned case that kept appearing on invoices, the cap that sat slightly higher, the smeared label that acted like a flag. The clean-shirted distributor man opened his box and took out a few things Ray didn't expect. A roll of clear tape, a pencil, a small envelope, and a spare bottle cap. No speeches, just steps. He showed Ray, in one short, practical demonstration, how the label glue could be softened with a damp cloth and lifted without tearing. How a cap could be reseated if you had the right liner. How small changes could be made quickly and covered up with ordinary mess. Then he stopped. He didn't explain a whole system. He didn't need to. Ray looked at the bottle in his hands and understood the smear for what it was. Not a defect. A signal that could survive handling. A way to say this one without speaking. That evening, the federal man told Ray to do one thing. Stock the cooler like you always do, he said, but keep your hands off the smeared bottle unless we say. Outside, they placed two sedans at different angles. One farther down the frontage road, one across the lot. A man sat in each with a camera, waiting for a repeat. Ray stayed behind the register and rang up regular life. Cigarettes, peanuts, a bottle of motor oil. Every so often, he forced himself to look away from the cooler. At 6:08, the work jacket man returned. Same entrance, same line to the cooler. Coins clinked. Bottle dropped, thunk. He crouched and scanned the rows like he was checking a seating chart. His fingers moved past clean labels without touching them, then stopped on a smeared edge. He pressed the cap. And then, something new. He didn't take it. He stared at the glue smear like he was reading it. His thumb traced a crescent of mess, checking the shape more than the bottle. Ray understood the message in that hesitation. The smear wasn't only this bottle. It was also this exact mark. Ray had stocked the cooler normally, but under instruction, he'd shifted one smeared bottle back a single slot. The mark was still there, but the position was off. The man set the bottle down hard on the counter, wider wet ring, spreading out like a clock face. He bought no gum this time. He walked out empty-handed. Outside, he didn't drive away. He stood beside his car and looked back at the station door, waiting like he expected someone else to notice the mistake and correct it. The federal man watched from the shadows of the lot. Ray watched from behind his own counter. At this point, Ray was no longer tracking a theft. He was standing inside someone else's delivery route. The federal man slid a fresh bottle across the counter and waited. And Ray had to choose. The federal man didn't ask Ray if he wanted to help. He asked him if he wanted to keep his job. Because by now, normal at the station wasn't normal anymore. Normal was a routine that kept draining Ray's pay while someone else used his cooler like a mailbox. The distributor rep set his cardboard box on the counter and opened it like a lunch pail. Inside, a clean bottle, a spare cap, a thin sheet of wax paper, and a small tin that looked like it belonged in a mechanic's drawer. Ray watched his hands, not his face. Nothing dangerous, the rep said. Nothing that explodes. Nothing you can't explain if someone walks in. The federal man leaned closer. We just need to know where it goes. Ray's throat tightened. You already followed him. Make straight. We followed him away from here, the federal man said. That doesn't tell us who he hands it to. Then he added softer, and he noticed the mark was wrong. That means he's cautious, which means we don't get many chances. Ray looked at the cooler. A line of glass bottles. Ordinary, cheap, familiar, and suddenly they felt like loaded objects, like anything that moved in the wrong order could break more than a paycheck. The distributor rep slid the clean bottle toward Ray. This is a control. Same brand, same shape, same weight. He lifted the cap and showed Ray the underside. The liner looked thicker than the normal one, almost like it had a second layer. Ray swallowed. That's why the cap sits higher. The rep nodded once. He pulled out the wax paper and tapped a corner of the tin. A pale dust clung to it so faint Ray almost thought it was nothing. Transfer powder, the federal man said. You can't see it in normal light. Under a lamp, it shows where hands have been. Ray stared at the dust. So you'll know who touched it. We'll know who touched it, the federal man corrected. And we'll know what else they touched after. Ray didn't like that. Not because it was illegal, because it was intimate. Hands, habits, roots. He pictured the powder on his own fingers, then on his steering wheel, then on his front door, a quiet trail back to his life. "I'm not," Ray started. "You won't handle it," the federal man said, reading the fear cleanly. "You stock the cooler, we'll place the bottle." Ray exhaled, slow. The plan was simple in the way dangerous plans always are. They would create a smeared label bottle that matched the courier's expectations, exactly same glue crescent, same spot on the label, same cap height, but inside, instead of a real payload, it would carry something harmless and traceable. A decoy message in a thin sealed strip under the liner? Not valuable to steal, valuable to follow. And they would dust the cap and the label edge so anyone who touched it would light up under the right lamp later. Ray watched them work behind a counter like it was a magic trick done in silence. The distributor rep dampened the cloth, softened the label glue, lifted the paper with practiced care, then pressed it down again in the same crescent smear Ray had seen a dozen times. Not too clean, not too messy, just right. The federal man didn't praise him. He just watched the smear like it was a signature. Then he looked at Ray. "When he comes, don't change anything else. Don't stare. Don't follow him with your eyes. You ring gum. You breathe. You let him do what he always does." Ray nodded, even though his stomach felt like it was sinking. By late afternoon, the station was running on 2 tracks at once. To every passing driver, it was just a place to buy fuel and sugar. But in the back aisle, near the mop bucket, 2 men were checking their watches and listening to the bell above the door like it was a metronome. Ray did his best to act like he didn't have a trap sitting in his cooler. He rang up cigarettes for a trucker. He made change for a woman buying a road map. He wiped a wet ring from the counter and tried not to think about circles that meant things. At 6:06, the sedan across the lot adjusted its position by half a car length. At 6:07, the man near the phone booth shifted his newspaper, even though he wasn't reading. At 6:08, the bell rang. Work jacket man. Same boots, same measured steps, same empty nod to nobody. Ray kept his hands on the counter. He forced his eyes onto the gum rack, then the cash drawer, then the receipt tape, anything but the cooler. Coins clinked. Bottle dropped, thunk. The sound hit Ray's chest harder than it ever had. He risked one glance. The man crouched and scanned the rows. His fingers moved with certainty, past clean labels, past the wrong smears, stopping only when he found the crescent that matched what he expected. He pressed the cap with his thumb. Then, satisfied, he lifted the bottle like it belonged to him. He walked it to the counter, set it down beside the gum. A wet ring began to bloom. "Same gum?" Ray asked. Because the federal man had told him to speak like it was a script. The man's eyes flicked up sharp, quick, measuring. "Yeah," he said. Ray rang it up. The man paid for the gum. He did not pay for the Coke. He picked up the bottle and left. Outside, both sedans moved one behind him, one ahead, sliding into traffic like they were just other cars on Route 1. Ray stood behind the register and felt his legs go weak from staying still. He told himself it was working. Then his manager walked out of the office. He didn't look at the cooler first. He looked at Ray, and Ray knew, instantly, that the manager had been watching him too, watching him get watched, watching the station fill with strangers who pretended not to be strangers. "You got friends now?" the manager said. Ray's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" The manager tilted his head toward the lot. Subtle. Cars, men, cameras. Don't play dumb. Ray tried to keep his face empty. He failed. The manager's eyes narrowed, not surprised, confirming. "You called the distributor?" he asked. Ray didn't answer. The manager leaned in, voice low. "You're not paid to make problems, Ray. You're paid to keep the lights on and the drawer clean." Ray felt heat in his ears. The drawer is clean, the paperwork isn't. The manager's jaw tightened like Ray had stepped on something tender. "Paperwork comes from above you," he said. "You push it, it pushes back." Ray didn't like the way he said above. Not corporate above? Something else. The manager straightened and forced his tone into casual. "Finish your shift. We'll talk after close." Then he walked away, and Ray realized his safest tool, silence, had stopped being protection. Because silence only works when you're invisible. And Ray wasn't invisible anymore. How camenus. Ender, what imaginable. 2 hours later, one of the federal men returned alone, slipping inside like a customer who didn't want to be noticed. He bought nothing. He stood near the register and spoke without looking at Ray. He drove north. He did not go home. Ray's fingers gripped the counter edge. Where did he go? A storage yard, the man said. He parked, waited, then walked. Ray pictured the bottle in the man's hand sweating through paper. Did he hand it off? Ray asked. Not in a clean exchange, the federal man said. He did a drop. Ray blinked. A drop? Left it somewhere, the man said. Someone else retrieved it later. Different person, different car. Ray's chest tightened. So there's another one. There's always another one, the federal man said. Then, finally, he looked at Ray direct, steady. We got a plate. We got a name. Ray's stomach lurched. Who is he? The federal man opened a small notebook and read like he was reciting a grocery item. Not a human being. Thomas Weller, he said. Works maintenance. Contract jobs. No fixed office. Clean enough record to disappear into routine. End quote. Ray repeated the name in his head, trying to make it feel less real. It didn't. And the second person? Ray asked. The federal man closed the notebook. Not yet. That was the new problem. The courier wasn't the center. He was a spoke. Ray stared at the cooler. What happens now? Now, we prove it, the federal man said. We let the bottle go through the system, then we trace what it touches. Ray's voice dropped. And my manager? The federal man didn't answer directly. He only said, be careful about who you trust at this station. Then he left as quietly as he'd come. His prison and our any prison are managed back raised. After closing, Ray locked the door and flipped the sign. The manager was waiting in the office doorway, arms folded. The silence between them felt heavier than any crate. You ever hear of people losing jobs for less? The manager asked. Ray kept his voice steady. I'm already losing money. The manager stepped closer. You think you're the only one under pressure? Ray didn't respond. The manager's eyes searched Ray's face like he was trying to decide what kind of damage Ray could do if he talked to the wrong person. Finally, he said, this station doesn't survive by being brave. Ray's mouth went tight. Then why are the bottles being used like signals? The manager flinched small, fast, too fast. Ray saw it and felt cold spread through him. The manager recovered. You don't know what you're talking about. But his voice had changed. Ray realized, in that moment, that the bottles weren't just a trap for a spy. They were also a test for Ray. A test of whether he would stay quiet. A test of whether he would accept being shaped by the system. Ray stood very still and listened to the hum of the station lights. Somewhere out on Route 1, the decoy bottle was sitting in a dark place, waiting for new hands. And if those hands reached for anything important afterward, door handles, car keys, cash drawers, then the powder would tell a story Ray couldn't control. The manager stared at him. Go home, he said. Sleep. Stop chasing ghosts. Ray nodded, but he didn't believe him. Because when Ray stepped outside, he saw a car at the far edge of the lot with its lights off. Not a federal sedan. Not a customer. Just a parked shape, patient in the dark like someone had decided Ray was part of the route now too. 2 nights after the decoy bottle left Ray's counter, the federal man returned with a paper bag and a look that said sleep was now a rumor. He didn't sit. He didn't even take his coat off. They retrieved it, he said. Different hands. Ray's stomach tightened. You followed him? We followed both, the man said, and we recovered the bottle. Well, 1,000. He set the bag down on the counter and opened it like it might bite. Inside was a Coca-Cola bottle that looked perfectly ordinary except for 2 things Ray couldn't unsee now. The smeared glue crescent on the label and the cap, sitting a hair too high. Ray felt his thumbnail scrape instinctively at the label edge, then stopped himself. Did the powder work? The federal man nodded once. Better than we hoped. He pulled out a small flashlight with a tinted lens and clicked it on. Under the beam, the bottle changed. Not glowing like a carnival trick, something subtler. A faint, dusty bloom around the cap ridges. Smears where fingers had pressed. A ghost map of handling that proved the bottle had passed through more than one person. Courier touched it, the federal man said. Then the retriever. Then a 3rd set of prints after. Ray's mouth went dry. A 3rd? The federal man didn't look pleased about it. Someone higher up. Someone careful. And 24 minder. They said the ratted. Ray stared at the bottle like it was suddenly heavy with invisible weight. So you know who? We know enough, the federal man said. We can tie the chain. He slid a thin manila envelope onto the counter beside the bottle. It had a lab stamp on it and handwriting Ray couldn't read. Latins, the federal man said. Cap, label edge, glass neck. The powder didn't just show us hands, it guided us to where to lift. Ray didn't touch the envelope. He didn't trust his own fingers. The federal man kept going, voice steady, like he had to stay factual to keep the fear contained. The retriever took the bottle from the storage yard and drove south. He didn't go home. He went to a rented garage behind a row of duplexes. Ray pictured the bottle sitting in the dark, waiting for the next step. He opened the bottle, the federal man said, not to drink, to check what was under the cap liner. Ray's heart thumped harder. There was something where on a step. There was a payload, the man said. Thin, sealed, not dangerous, but real enough that it matches what we suspected. Ray tried to speak and failed once before sound came out. So this wasn't just stealing product. The federal man's eyes stayed on the bottle. No, Ray swallowed. Spy. The federal man didn't confirm it with drama. He confirmed it with restraint. Foreign intelligence, he said. Courier system. Low noise. Cheap. Looks like nothing. End quote. Ray stared at the smeared label edge. The little crescent of glue. The simplest signal in the world. A way to say this one without saying anything at all. And Thomas Weller? Ray asked. The federal man reached into his coat and pulled out a small stack of forms, copies, carbon sheets, bank slips. He laid them out like a dealer. Money orders, he said. Small amounts, regular intervals, sent from different towns, always cashed under variations of the same name. Day is ride. Ray leaned closer, careful not to touch. That's how he got paid. That's how he stayed clean, the federal man said. Too small to look like a payout, too regular to be random. Then he pointed to the distributor invoice copy. And this, he said, tapping the returned case line item, is how your station got used as cover. Paper movement, inventory noise, enough confusion to hide one bottle's true purpose. Ray felt cold settle behind his ribs. My manager? When even. The federal man didn't answer quickly. That was an answer on its own. Ray's voice dropped. He knew. The federal man kept his tone neutral. We think he suspected. We don't think he understood the whole chain. Ray heard the careful wording. We think. We don't think. Nothing was certain until it was pinned down. So what happens now? Ray asked. The federal man looked up at the cooler, then at the door, then back at Ray. Now we close the loop, he said. We let Weller come back. We give him what he expects, and we take him with it in his hand. Ray's pulse spiked. Here? The federal man nodded. This is his routine. If we pull him out of it, he gets cautious. If we meet him inside it, he stays mechanical. Ray looked at the station, his station, and felt it turn into a stage. What do you need from me? Ray asked. The federal man didn't hesitate. The same thing you've been doing. Ray blinked. Nothing? Normal, the federal man said. You ring gum. You wipe wet rings. You don't try to be brave in a way that gets you hurt. Ray didn't like the last word. The federal man saw it. You won't be alone. We'll be here before he arrives. We'll be here after he leaves, if he leaves. Ray nodded once, because there wasn't anything else to do with fear except shape it into motion. That scene, that AGZ rents. On the day they chose, the station felt too bright. Every sound was louder than usual. The bell above the door, the pop of the cooler latch, the coins in the vending machine. Ray stocked shelves with hands that wanted to shake. He forced them steady. In the back aisle, 2 agents checked a small lamp and a camera. No big equipment, no uniforms, nothing that screamed FBI. The bottle waited in the cooler, front row, positioned like a promise. Its label smear had been matched perfectly. Same crescent, same thickness, same ugly little thumbprint of glue. Ray's thumbnail hovered over it once, then pulled away. Don't touch. Don't change. At 6:08, the bell rang. Weller walked in like he was punching a clock. Work jacket, boots, eyes that didn't linger on anything that wasn't necessary. He went straight to the cooler. Coins clinked, bottle dropped, thunk. Ray didn't move. Weller crouched, scanned, and found the smear. His thumb pressed the cap, checking height. Satisfied. He lifted the bottle, he walked it to the counter, and set it down beside the gum. A wet ring formed, perfect and round. Gum, Weller said. Ray rang it up. Weller paid for the gum. He picked up the bottle. And for half a second, just half his eyes met Ray's. Not friendly, not threatening, evaluating. Ray kept his face blank and let the silence do its old job. Weller turned toward the door. That's when the federal man stepped out from the shadowed aisle with a calm that didn't belong in a gas station. "Thomas Weller," he said. Weller froze. Not the reaction of a man who got caught stealing a Coke. The reaction of a man whose map just caught fire. He didn't run. He didn't swing. He didn't shout. He did something quieter and more revealing. His fingers tightened around the bottleneck, like he was deciding whether to drop it. The federal man didn't raise his voice. Put it down. Weller's jaw worked once. He set the bottle on the counter, slow, careful, like setting down an egg. Two more men moved in from the lot, fast and controlled. Weller lifted his hands. Under the lamp, the faint powder bloom on his fingertips showed like a second skin. Ray watched the glow and felt his stomach flip. A smear you couldn't see in daylight. A trail you couldn't feel. Evidence that lived in the spaces between ordinary acts. The federal man nodded to the bottle. "Open it." Weller didn't. His silence landed heavy. The federal man opened it himself, methodical. He didn't drink. He didn't pour it out. He lifted the cap and peeled back the liner with a tool. So small Ray almost missed it. Underneath was a thin, sealed strip, rolled tight, protected from liquid, hidden where no casual eye would look. Ray felt a chill. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. Because he'd handled bottles his whole life and never once thought the cap could be a pocket. Weller stared at the exposed strip and exhaled like something inside him finally gave up. The federal man spoke again, still calm. "Who retrieves it after you?" Weller didn't answer. Silence Ray's old tool turned into Weller's shield, but it didn't fit him the way it fit Ray. It looked strained, desperate. The agents cuffed him without violence, without spectacle. As they let him out, Weller glanced back at Ray once more. Not anger, not apology. A look that said, "You weren't supposed to matter." Many as a dance today, having Marcus's would be in Gedamakosen and the Kraudiand and Exivin. An hour later, after Weller was gone and the station lights still hummed like nothing had happened, the manager walked out of the office. He looked older than he had that morning. He stared at the counter, at the wet ring Ray hadn't wiped yet, at the empty space where the bottle had sat. "What did you do?" the manager asked. Ray's voice came out steady, surprising even him. "I stopped paying for your paper losses." The manager's mouth tightened. "You think you did the right thing?" Ray didn't answer. He just looked back. Because, for the first time, silence wasn't saving anyone. The manager turned his head slightly toward the lot, toward the sedans, toward the shadows that had become real. His face cracked for a moment, and Ray saw fear under the control. Then the manager said something Ray didn't expect. "I didn't know what it was," he said. "I thought it was smuggling, something cheap." Ray heard the half-truth in it. Or maybe the truth. Either way, it didn't undo the damage. 2 days later, the manager was gone. Not with a farewell. Not with a firing notice. Just gone. Office emptied, keys turned in, name removed from the schedule. And Ray learned the hardest part of traps. They don't only catch the target. They catch the people standing nearby. Ray kept his job, technically. But customers looked at him differently when 2 sedans parked across the lot for a week straight. The distributor rep stopped coming by. The station got audited. The owner called once. Short and cold, asking why federal attention had found its way to a place that sold oil and soda. No one said thank you. No one said you helped. In the official story, Ray was a witness. A small footnote. In his real life, he was the man whose routine got rewritten. And every time a bottle hit the tray, thunk, Ray's thumbnail would twitch toward the label edge, hunting for a smear that meant the world had shifted again. The federal man didn't ask Ray if he wanted to help. He asked him if he wanted to keep his job. Because the station wasn't just losing product anymore. It was losing trust, the kind that gets replaced without a goodbye. The distributor rep set a small cardboard box on the counter and opened it like a lunch pail. Inside, one clean Coke bottle, a spare cap, a thin sheet of wax paper, and a little tin no bigger than a shoe shine can. Ray didn't touch any of it. He kept his hands flat on the counter like the wood could hold him steady. Nothing dangerous, the rep said. Nothing you can't explain if a customer walks in. The federal man leaned in. We need to know where the bottle goes after it leaves here. Ray swallowed. You already followed him. End quote. 1-7. We followed him away from your station, the federal man said. That doesn't tell us who receives it. Ray looked at the cooler door. It was the same dented handle he'd yanked open 1,000 times. Now it felt like the handle to a locked room. The rep lifted the spare cap and showed Ray the underside. The liner looked thicker than normal, like it had a second layer pressed into it. That's why the cap sits high, Ray said. The rep nodded. Then the federal man tapped the tin. Transfer powder. You won't see it in daylight. Under a lamp, it shows where hands were. Ray's stomach tightened. And where those hands go next? The federal man didn't deny it. Door handles, keys, steering wheels, it's a trail people don't feel. Ray pictured his own hands on his cash drawer, on his car, on his apartment doorknob. The thought made his throat go dry. I'm not, he started. You won't handle the bottle, the federal man said. You do what you already do. You act normal. Bay? Normal. That word again. Normal meant coins clinking. Normal meant the bottle dropping thunk and Ray pretending he didn't care. The rep built the decoy fast and quiet. He softened the label glue with a damp cloth, lifted the paper just enough to reseat it, then pressed it down with the same ugly crescent smear Ray had seen all month. Not too neat, not too sloppy. Just believable. Ray watched the rep's thumbnail press the label edge into place and felt his own thumb twitch, remembering all those nights scraping dried glue like it was guilt. The federal man studied the smear like it was a signature. Then he looked at Ray. When he comes in, ring the gum, don't stare. Don't follow him with your eyes. Let him be mechanical. Ray nodded, even though his pulse wouldn't settle. By late afternoon, the station ran on 2 tracks. To customers, it was fuel and sugar and road noise. To Ray, it was a room with hidden watchers pretending to be bored. A sedan sat across the lot with 2 men inside. Another was parked farther down the frontage road. The men didn't talk, they didn't smoke, they watched the door like it owed them money. Ray wiped the counter twice and kept leaving the wet ring alone for a moment, just to prove to himself he still controlled something. At 6:08, the bell rang. Work jacket man. Same boots. Same pace. Same empty nod. Ray forced his eyes to the register tape. Coins clinked. Bottle dropped. Thunk. Ray looked up anyway. He couldn't help it. The man crouched and scanned the rows like he was checking assigned seats. He moved past clean labels without touching them. Then his fingers stopped at the crescent smear. He pressed the cap with his thumb. Satisfied. He lifted the bottle and walked it to the counter. He set it down beside the gum rack, right where the wet ring always formed. Gum, he said. Same kind? Ray asked, because the federal man had told him to keep the script plain. The man's eyes flicked up sharp, measuring and then away. Yeah, Ray rang it up. The man paid for the gum. He did not pay for the Coke. He picked up the bottle and walked out like he'd never been nervous a day in his life. Outside, the sedans moved. One slipped in behind him. The other rolled out ahead, slow and patient, like traffic. Ray exhaled so hard, his chest ached. Then his manager stepped out of the office. He didn't look at the cooler. He looked at the lot. You got friends now? He asked. Ray kept his face blank. Just customers. The manager's mouth tightened. Customers don't sit in cars for hours. They don't carry cameras. Ray felt the air shift. The manager wasn't guessing. He was testing whether Ray would lie well. You call the distributor, the manager said. Ray didn't answer. The manager leaned closer, voice low. You're paid to keep the drawer clean. You're not paid to bring attention here. Ray tasted metal in his mouth. The drawer is clean. Paper comes from above you, the manager said. You push it, it pushes back. He straightened like the conversation was finished. Finish your shift. We'll talk after close. Then he walked away, and Ray realized something simple and ugly. The manager wasn't just afraid of theft, he was afraid of witnesses. An hour later, one of the federal men came in alone and stood near the counter without buying anything. He didn't go home, he said quietly. Ray's fingers curled against the counter edge. Where did he go? A storage yard, the agent said. He parked, waited, then walked away on foot. Ray pictured the bottle leaving the safety of the man's hands, sitting somewhere dark, waiting to be touched again. Did he hand it off? Ray asked. Not clean, the agent said. He did a drop. Another person retrieved it later. Ray felt his stomach dip. So he's not the end. The agent's face didn't change. He's a courier. There's always another set of hands. He lowered his voice one notch. We have his name. Ray waited. Thomas Weller, the agent said. Maintenance contracts. No fixed office. Easy to vanish into routine. Ray repeated the name in his head like a prayer he didn't want. When the agent left, Ray watched the lot again. At the far edge, a car sat with its lights off. Not one of the federal sedans. Not a customer. Just a shape, parked and patient, like someone had decided Ray belonged to the route now, too. He turned back to the counter and stared at the wet ring until it faded. The station kept humming, pretending nothing had changed. But Ray could feel the next bottle already falling. 2 days after the decoy bottle left Ray's counter, the federal man came back alone. No sirang parode this time. No camera in hand. Just a paper grocery bag and a tired look. He set the bag on the counter, then didn't touch it, like it belonged to someone else already. We got it back, he said. Ray kept his voice low. From him? From the next hands, the man said, not his. Ray stared at the cooler door. The dented handle, the same stuck hinge. He'd been yanking that door open for years. Now it felt like a latch on a secret. The federal man opened the bag. Inside was a Coke bottle that looked ordinary until you knew where to look. The label had the crescent smear. The cap sat a hair too high. Ray's thumbnail twitched toward the glue edge. He stopped it midair. The federal man took out a small flashlight with a tinted lens. Under that light, the bottle stopped being a bottle. A faint dusty ring clung to the cap ridges. Smudges showed where fingers had pressed and slid. Not just one set, more than one. Courier handled it, the federal man said. Then a retriever, then someone careful after that. Ray's mouth went dry. So there's a chain. There's always a chain, the man said. He slid a manila envelope across the counter. No letterhead, no grand stamp, just lab tape, and a date written by hand. Latent lifts, he said. Cap, label edge, neck. Ray didn't touch the envelope. He didn't want his skin anywhere near it. The federal man kept his voice flat, like he was reading from a rulebook that had no sympathy. The retriever picked up the bottle from a storage yard, drove south, didn't go home, went to a rented garage behind duplexes. Ray pictured the bottle sitting in a dark space, waiting. A mailbox you could drink from if you didn't know better. And the message? Ray asked. The federal man reached into the bag again and pulled out the cap. He didn't pry it with drama. He used a small tool and lifted the liner like he'd done it 100 times. Underneath was a thin, sealed strip, rolled tight, protected from liquid, hidden where no casual eye ever lingers. Ray looked away for a second, then looked back. Because looking away didn't change anything. That's what they're moving, the federal man said. Small, quiet, regular. Ray heard himself say it. Foreign. The man didn't nod. He didn't confirm with a speech. He just said, counterintelligence. Then he added, you did the right thing, calling the distributor. Ray's throat tightened around the words he didn't say. It took me too long. The federal man didn't give Ray room to sit in it. We're going to take him inside his routine, he said. Here. Ray's eyes went to the office door. My manager's been watching, Ray said. He's not blind. We know, the federal man said, and he's part of why we can't stretch this out. How, and that's all. That was the first time the choice felt like it had a closing door. The station couldn't hold this pressure forever. Not Ray. Not the paperwork. Not the eyes in the dark. What do you need from me? Ray asked. Same as before, the federal man said. Ring the gum. Keep your hands off the bottle. Don't try to be brave in a way that gets you hurt. The word landed. Hurt. Not shouted, not dramatized, just placed on the counter like change. And then and done I be dunder. That evening, Ray kept the station running the way you keep a boat afloat in bad weather, by doing small tasks on purpose. He wiped the counter. He faced the gum. He restocked the cigarettes. He didn't look at the cooler unless he had to. Outside, the federal sedans sat in their positions, ordinary cars pretending to be nothing. Farther out, near the tree line at the edge of the lot, another car sat with its lights off. The one from before. Ray saw it. Then he looked away. Silence. Convenience. The old habit. The non-heroic choice? At 6:08, the bell over the door rang. Work jacket man. Same boots. Same steady pace. He moved like a person trying not to exist. He went straight to the cooler. Coins clinked. A bottle dropped thunk into the tray. Ray stayed behind the register. He forced his eyes onto the receipt tape. He heard the cooler door close. He heard the footsteps. The man set the bottle down beside the gum rack. A wet ring started to form. Gum, the man said. Ray rang it up. The man paid for the gum. He didn't pay for the Coke. Ray saw his thumb press the cap once, checking the height, confirming the liner, confirming the hidden pocket. Then the man lifted the bottle to leave. A voice came from the back aisle, calm and plain. Thomas Weller. The work jacket man froze. Not like someone caught stealing a soda. Like someone who just heard the wrong name in the wrong place. He didn't run. He didn't swing. He tightened his fingers on the bottleneck for 1/2 second, like he was deciding whether to drop it. Set it down, the federal man said. Weller set it down slowly, careful not to spill. Careful not to crack the glass. 2 more men came in from the lot, fast and controlled. No shouting, no movie hero posture. Weller lifted his hands. Under the small lamp the agents brought, faint dust showed on his fingertips. A thin bloom along the ridges of his thumb and forefinger. Ray watched the powder prove the touch. The federal man nodded toward the cap. Open it. Weller didn't move. His silence wasn't confidence. It was a locked door. The federal man opened it himself. The liner came up. The sealed strip appeared, and the room changed. Because now, it wasn't a weird bottle. It was a device. A method. A job. One of the agents photographed the liner, the strip, the cap height. Another placed the strip into an evidence envelope without letting it touch bare skin. No speeches, just steps. Weller's jaw worked once. He stared at the counter like he was trying to erase the wet ring with his eyes. Who picks it up after you? The federal man asked. Weller stayed quiet. Silence again, except now silence didn't protect a paycheck. It protected a network. The agents cuffed him without a struggle and walked him out through the front door. Ray watched Weller's boots step over the threshold, then disappear into the dark. And only then did Ray notice his manager standing near the office doorway. The manager hadn't come out to help. He hadn't come out to demand an explanation. He'd come out to see who would win. His eyes flicked from the agents to Ray, then down to the counter. To the bottle, to the cap, to the exposed liner. The manager's face tightened like something had been taken from him. Not product, protection. The federal man looked at him and said, "We'll need to speak with you too." The manager tried to hold his calm. He almost made it. Then he glanced just once toward the far edge of the lot, toward that dark car. That glance did more than any confession could. An agent stepped outside, hand near his coat pocket, scanning the tree line. The parked car's engine turned over. Headlights stayed off. It rolled away slow, like it didn't want to be remembered. The federal man didn't chase it. He didn't have to. He had the bottle. He had the liner. He had the powder. He had the prints. Decisive evidence. The kind that doesn't argue. The manager swallowed and said, "I didn't know what it was." Ray didn't answer him, because this is what Ray learned too late. You can participate without understanding, and still pay the same price. DOAT nasty. And may common cesatus. By closing time, the station felt hollow. The owner arrived in a clean coat, eyes sharp with embarrassment. He didn't ask Ray if he was okay. He asked, "Why are federal agents in my lot?" Ray started to speak, then stopped, because there wasn't a version of the truth that kept things simple. The owner looked at the cooler, at the counter, at the wet ring that still hadn't dried. Then he said, "We're shutting early until this blows over." Ray heard what it meant. Not, "Go home early. Don't come back." The federal man slipped Ray a business card with a number written on the back. No promises, no reassurance, just a line that said, "Call if anything changes." Ray folded it and put it in his wallet behind his rent money. Outside, the sedans pulled away. The lot emptied. The station lights kept humming like they always had. Ray wiped the counter one last time. The wet ring smeared, then vanished. But the habit stayed. He looked at the cooler door and listened for a sound that wasn't there anymore. The coins, the clink, the bottle drop. He waited anyway, because once your routine becomes a mailbox, you don't stop hearing footsteps. You just learn to listen for the next one. Weeks passed, and the station tried to become ordinary again. The sedans stopped coming first. Then, the customers stopped asking questions. Then they stopped coming as often. The owner reopened the next Monday with a new manager whose name Ray didn't know. The cooler was scrubbed. The vending tray was replaced. The gum rack got a fresh cardboard display like that could reset the air. Ray came in once to collect his last check. No handshake. No apology. Just an envelope slid across the counter with his hours written in blunt pencil. The owner didn't say thank you. He didn't say, "You did the right thing." He said, "This place can't afford attention." Ray took the envelope and walked out into the lot like he'd never worked there. The next month, he got a job at a warehouse outside town. Forklifts, pallets, a punch clock that never lied on paper. The work was louder, but it didn't look at him. On breaks, the men drank soda from cans and talked about sports and weather and how gas used to be cheaper. Ray didn't join in much. He ate his sandwich and watched the loading dock door rise and fall. Sometimes he'd catch himself counting anyway. Crates, cases, returns. Numbers that didn't mean anything here. He kept a little pocket notebook from the station in his back pocket until the cover went soft. Timed out bottle, who? He never wrote another line in it. Around mid-afternoon, every day, the warehouse vending machine would drop a drink with the same dull sound, metal on metal, so close to the old cooler tray that Ray would look up before he remembered where he was. The sound always faded before anyone else noticed. In the months that followed, Ray heard the case in fragments. A neighbor told him someone had been arrested for espionage. A guy at the warehouse said he'd read about a Coke bottle trick in a newspaper. Small story, inside pages. A cousin asked him at a cookout if he'd ever met the FBI, like it was a joke. Ray didn't correct anyone. He learned something he hadn't known before. When you touch a story like that, people either want to borrow it or forget it. Nobody wants to carry it. Once, in late spring, Ray drove past his old station on Route 1. The sign was new. The pumps were the same. The cooler sat in the same spot by the door, but now it had a brighter light inside, like brightness was security. A teenager behind the counter laughed at something on a small radio. The doorbell rang. A man bought gum and left. Life kept moving through the place without noticing the old grooves. Ray sat at the red light and watched the front window. For a second, he imagined the old routine returning on its own, someone stepping in, someone selecting the one bottle that wasn't meant to be drunk. But nothing happened. It didn't return because it didn't need to. Whatever had used that station had already moved on to someplace even cheaper, even quieter, even easier to ignore. Ray drove on. At home, he still washed his hands the moment he walked in, like there was powder on his fingertips that only he could see. He still checked his wallet twice before he went to sleep. He still avoided leaving receipts on the counter. Not because he thought anyone was watching, because his brain had learned the shape of being used. One night, he found a Coke bottle in a grocery bag his roommate carried in glass, cold, sweating. Ray held it for a moment and felt the old reflex come back like a twitch. He didn't open it. He didn't drink. He turned the label to the light and stared at the edge where glue met paper, waiting for a crescent smear that meant more than it should. Then he put it back in the bag and went to wash his hands again. Time didn't fix anything. It just made the damage blend into routine. His thumbnail still hunted that dried glue smear.